right around the hospital in the area of the medical complex. And what I saw was relentless bombing that was taking place day and night. You saw many people who were injured, many of whom were children, many of people who were just trying to go about their regular day, looking for where their next meal would come from, looking from where they could attain water. And in the process of doing so, they were hit by tank shells or by airstrikes or by sniper fire. It was really horrific and overwhelming. I mean, I work at a level 1 trauma center in Chicago, and the south side of Chicago is no stranger to trauma or to gang violence. This was something that was on a level that I don't think many people in America have ever experienced. Every aspect of life in Gaza has been affected, has been disrupted, has been made harder. And you really felt that while you were in the hospital. The physicians that I was working alongside have been working nonstop for nearly 4 months. They also are hungry. They also are concerned about where they can get clean water from. Their families have been displaced multiple times, and they're being asked to take care of waves and waves of people who are coming in as victims of bomb strikes or tank shellings. You saw children walking around the complex barefoot. They looked like they were hungry, looking for food. They were trying to just find some sort of refuge. They're not going to school. They're not getting vaccinated. They're not going to their regular appointments. And what we saw on the nights when it was really intensifying is a mass migration of people. I remember looking outside of the hospital window and seeing a 4-year-old girl holding onto her pillow and her dad hurriedly trying to grab whatever he could, and they were going to flee on foot further south. Probably would have to walk 5 or 6 miles in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 a.m. As you heard F-16s above head and the relentless bombing taking place. And I thought, this can't be real. This is not something that I would expect in 2024, something to be happening. And I think that part of what we're seeing is, that these people are consistently being dehumanized and re-traumatized. So it's very simple to just say people are being asked to evacuate. People are being asked to go to a safer place. But what I realized very quickly, and what the doctors in Gaza told me, is that there is no place in Gaza that's safe. There's nowhere that you can take refuge. No place has been spared from bombing. And just because there might be an intense military campaign taking place in Khan Yunis like there was, it doesn't mean that Rafah, which is further south, would be any safer and wouldn't be subject to any sort of bombing. And that the people in the north of Gaza were also suffering immensely. I mean, I was there in the midst of a 8-day telecommunications blackout. And I remember the doctors there who were asked to work these 24-hour shifts, thinking about their families and not knowing what was going to take place, and not knowing if they were okay, not knowing if they had eaten for the day. And so that's something that I think was really traumatizing to experience secondhand, and I was only there for less than 3 weeks. This is what they've had to deal with for 4 months.
Reports are from the UN, at least 300 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza. Also, Al Jazeera, speaking to a doctor at Nasser Hospital, where you were, Dr. Ahmed, in Khan Yunis, said 95% of staff fled to Rafah as Israeli forces, quote, bomb anything in front of them. So how many people are taking refuge in Nasser in addition to the wounded? How many dead bodies are piling up? And how many medical staff are left?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that was noticeably thinning every single day that the military assault was taking place in Khan Yunis, that more and more staff had to leave the hospital to go take care of their families and make sure their families were safe. You can say that there was probably 24 in terms of medical staff and doctors as well as nurses. I just want to point out that none of these physicians or nurses have been paid also for the last 4 months. They received one payment of $200 in November. They otherwise are volunteering, essentially, and just trying to serve their people. And in the process of that, as you mentioned, many of them have been subjected to violence, have been killed. Many have been arrested as well. And so that was one of the concerns, that when we were in Khan Yunis and there was some serious, intense bombing taking place, is you saw that there was this sort of tension that existed. And I remember trying to say, I think the hospital should be safe. And they very quickly said, what would make you think that a Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis is any different than Shifa in Gaza City, or Al Indonesian hospital, or any of the other hospitals that have been attacked? What happens is, while these attacks are taking place, as you mentioned, people who have been killed, their bodies are left in the street, and it's very dangerous for any sort of first responder to be able to go and try to retrieve the body, or to try to bring somebody who's wounded. So many people may die in the the process. And so you see healthcare workers digging mass graves to be able to bury some of the wounded there. And there are thousands of people sheltering in the hospital. Amy, if you were to walk in Nasser Hospital, to go to any floor, you see people in every inch and every corner. They may have this small, thin mattress or a blanket over them, families congregating together because they assume that the hospital can be a sanctuary. And time again, that has been proven incorrect in Gaza. And so again, people have no choice. They have nowhere left to go. And the hospital staff are overworked. And I understand that there's this notion that the people of Gaza are different. I experienced that. They are so resilient and they are so impressive from every single corner or every single angle. They're able to do so much with so little resources, and they are phenomenal physicians and healthcare workers. But why are we insisting that we keep pushing them to their limit, to the maximum limit? Why do we keep trying to test their superhuman capabilities? That's something that I found really disturbing while I was there.
Dr. Thayer Ahmed, we're going to ask you to stay after the show. We're going to continue our conversation with your eyewitness report on the ground in Gaza, now just back in Chicago, emergency room physician, volunteered at Al-Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Palestinian officials and human rights groups are denouncing the move by the United States and at least 12 other countries to temporarily suspend funding to UNRWA. That's the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, after Israel accused 12 UNRWA employees of helping Hamas stage the October 7th attack. 9 of the employees have been fired. UNRWA said 2 of the accused employees are dead. UNRWA is one of the largest employers in Gaza with a staff of over 13,000. It provides aid to most of Gaza's 2.3 million residents. The agency's long been targeted by Israel. Since Israel's assault on Gaza began, over 150 UNRWA staffers have been killed. Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory, said on social media, quote, the day after ICJ concluded that Israel's plausibly committing genocide in Gaza, some states decide to defund UNRWA, collectively punishing millions of Palestinians at the most critical time and most likely violating their obligations under the Genocide Convention, unquote.
And the human rights
Meanwhile,
Act
UNRWA
of
chief
the
Philippe
world.
Lazzarini condemned the freezing of the funds at a time when famine looms in Gaza. He said, quote, Palestinians in Gaza did not need the additional collective punishment. This stains all of us, he said.
Yes,
and the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged donor nations to continue supporting UNRWA. For more, we're going to Oslo, Norway, where we're joined by Jan Egeland, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Norway's decided to continue its funding of UNRWA. Jan, thanks so much for being with us. Can you start off by responding to the cutting off of funding at a time when, among other things, Gaza is under bombardment and is on the edge of famine?
Yeah, it's the worst possible reaction to these allegations that some, maybe a dozen of the 13,000 UNRWA aid workers betrayed our humanitarian principles of neutrality and independence and participated in the horrific attacks on Israel. That, however, was met immediately with the response of UNRWA by, as you said, firing these staff and now having an independent investigation. What the donors did, the US, the UK, Germany, Italy, Finland, Netherlands, Australia, and some others, did was to cut all aid to the children of Gaza, to the women in Gaza, to the
all those nations must be looked at sideways by their citizens, and anyone that's in leadership that he just called the name of must be removed.
Do not
and you must come up against
the
them.
many innocent for the sins
Because there is no government that should be allowing this genocidal behavior.
Very wrong, it seems.
Now it'll be interesting to see if Israel hands over the evidence for the UN to investigate this situation, because we're talking about an immediate cutoff by many of these nations suspending weapons. I wanted to read you a clip of the former Israeli official Noga Arbel, who said it'll be impossible to win the war if we do not destroy UNRWA, and this destruction must begin immediately. The Prime Minister, Netanyahu, Netanyahu said there will be no UNRWA in post-war Gaza. Your response, Jan Egeland, and talk about you're the head of a large humanitarian aid group. How important is UNRWA to all of the groups, not to mention the people on the ground?
Same as the Build Back Better
UNRWA
plan.
is completely essential.
What's the difference?
It's true that I lead the NRC, Norwegian Refugee Council. We're a large humanitarian group across the world. We're on all sides of all conflict lines for the displaced and the refugees. And we've been in Gaza for 2 decades. We've been funded all over the world by the United States and by 40 other donor nations and international agencies. In Gaza, we have to recognize that all of us combined, other groups, are not even close to be what UNRWA is for the people of Gaza. UNRWA was a response to the creation of Israel and the 1948 war that displaced so many of the original Palestinian population to Gaza, to the West Bank, and elsewhere. UNRWA was then created to give them relief and works.
They invaded in the 1930s.
Since then, there's not been a political, peaceful settlement, and that is because the international community has not been able to force the parties, Israel and the Palestinians, to settle this conflict, and thereby we end up by having humanitarian groups like, first and foremost, UNRWA, provide for the population. So to undermine and undercut UNRWA as extremists within the Israeli government are doing is basically to say we're going to punish the women and children, the innocent, on the other side for what some extremists have done in a situation of utter turmoil and perpetuous conflict that we're not ourselves willing to try to settle with talks on a future. It's very wrong, and the international donors must stay with the humanitarian organizations like Norway did. Norway is a large donor, giving much more per capita to Palestinians and elsewhere than any other donor. We stay with UNRWA, and we say, good that you terminated all of those contracts and fired these people, and good that there is an investigation, and then we'll draw the conclusions what we should do for the future.
Exactly. Do not
let Biden. What evidence is there of Israel's charges? Have they handed over the evidence?
Run our world.
As far as I know, it's not been received by UNRWA or by the UN investigators. I hope they will be received so that they can do a thorough investigation of this. Very serious allegations. I read about them in the New York Times. And if it's true, again, they betrayed all of our principles, really. Neutrality, impartiality, etc. That is so important for us who are armed humanitarian workers in the crossfire around the world. But of course, no one who's working across the Middle East can guarantee that there are not people within our midst that may, in the end, have hidden agendas. Palestinians cannot do that. Israeli cannot do that. We know of many Israelis who've done very bad things in Gaza, shooting at people with white flags. It's documented in detail. They've even shot their own people with white flags. They have settler organizations, mafia-style settler organizations, displacing unarmed women and children and families across the West Bank. Many of these are recruited to the Israeli Defense Forces. They belong in jail, but they are in the Israeli Defense Force. No one can guarantee that there are not problems. Therefore, they have to be investigated, and there has to be action taken every time something happens.
These criminals come from God too.
Funding to people in great need. It's the worst possible response.
Jan Egeland, I want to thank you for being with us, Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, speaking to us from Oslo.